Speaking of speaking with authority, do you hear how loud I am today? Meg's got authority, man. Maybe not, but at least I'm loud, so that's different. So our gospel today is really interesting. I think it can be tempting to really, really simplify this, and to just go with Jesus cures demons, and thus begins some sort of sermon where we talk about unclean spirits and exorcisms and being possessed, and that can be a tempting place to go. Okay, maybe not for Episcopalians, but for some people it can be a tempting place to go. I'm pretty sure I'd have to lock those doors if I started talking about being possessed with you. So it can be really, really tempting when we get a passage to really simplify it, take it, just this piece of it, and go crazy with it, right? And yet, that's always the wrong thing to do. If you are proof texting, you're missing the entire arc. What's really, really important here is to realize that this is the first public act of Jesus' ministry in Mark. Now, each gospel has kind of their agenda, if you will. The Jesus that they proclaim, the people to whom they are writing, what they really want to communicate. And it's really important to have an idea of what those are and to get a flavor for your gospeler. And gospeler, right? That's a fun word, right? Anyway, how about the writer of the gospel? Technically it's gospel. We'll go writer of the gospel because it's a little less awkward to say. And so we've got Mark. And Mark is new to us. We just started Mark in Advent, which is the beginning of the church year. We'd been hanging out with some other folks for a while. So this is Mark's year. You're going to get to hear a lot of Mark. Now, Mark is interesting. Mark is very in your face. His Jesus is very explosive in expectations and changes. So what's important to do is to take each gospeler, I did it again, sorry, each gospeler and to understand what they're trying to say with their first public act of Jesus. Take, for instance, John. John's first public act is the miracle of turning water into wine. Now, that's a great one. Very, very useful. But what does that say? What does that say about John's Jesus? John's Jesus is incredibly divine. John focuses a lot on the miracles, on the divinity of Jesus. He's very, very high in his Christology. Mark is going to be a little bit different. Mark's focus is his first public act of Jesus is an exorcism. So it could be tempting to be like, oh, well, Mark's Jesus is into demons, in demonology. That would be a simple place to go. And yet, if you actually look at what Mark does, Mark's message is always explosive. That Jesus and God are explosive. We have expectations. We attempt to contain and develop rules for what we expect the divine to be like, right? So God will always be this way, and then we're over here, and we really like a separation frequently. Humans over here, God over here, because God, for as awesome as God can be, is also terrifying. And it's really nice if God doesn't get too much into our stuff. You know, because like God and our stuff, like we're going to have to change and do stuff. So we like God over here in the temple, in the Holy of Holies. We approach God when we want to, but God is over here. God is completely other. And we humans are over here doing our own thing. It's safer that way. It's safer if God is completely other. And so we develop expectations of the divine and rules for the divine. But Mark comes in, and Mark's Jesus explodes expectations. Mark's Jesus refuses to contain God. God cannot be contained. The overarching message, there is a method to the message, though. This is why you shouldn't preach off script, like why you should have a script, because God only knows what's going to come out of my mouth. God does, hopefully. Otherwise, we're all in trouble. So, anyway, there's method to my message. And so the message of Mark is that God cannot be, that in Christ Jesus, God is with us. That Jesus comes in the midst of us, and when Jesus does that, God comes into the midst of us. There's no more humans over here and the divine over here. And some people who are well-trained and purified, who wear ridiculous-looking garb, they, in the right circumstances, may carefully approach the divine, the Holy of Holies, the temple. The rest of us, we stay over here. In Mark, that changes. Mark's message is that God is one of us. God is in the muck. God is in the mess. That's explosive. And in many ways, it's dangerous. So here in this story, Jesus comes and commands divinity. Because the reality is, no matter how well trained you are not allowed to approach demons. Because they are deity. They are divine. They are otherworldly. And so it's a dangerous thing for humans to approach that and to take that on. In fact, at this time when demons were a big topic, you made sure that people who were like weirdo and demonic, keep them over there. Because, you don't want to mess with that stuff. Like, what if it spreads? You don't know. You don't know how that demon got in there, and you don't know how it's going to get out and maybe get in you. You got to watch out for this stuff. So we keep things separate, right? And yet Jesus comes and can command that. He's not only willing to approach it, but he's willing to command it, to take that on, to wrestle with that. So the message that we have today in our gospel is that God is in our midst. God is no longer out there somewhere else. God is here with us. Now, I understand that you're going to leave here and be like, well, that's stupid. I don't feel like God is with us at all. I feel like we are in the midst of the muck. And if God were truly divine, if God really, truly existed, like you're going to go talk to somebody, you're going to get in a conversation with an atheist, and they're like, well, that's stupid. And if we are completely honest, we all wrestle with that, don't we? We all, in the darkest of our dark moments, or when we're being completely logical, we're like, none of this makes any sense. If that were true, and God were really in the midst of us, how would all these horrible things happen? Surely a divine God wouldn't let this stuff happen. In our darkest of moments, the reality is that's something that we wrestle with, isn't it? And I'm going to argue with you that you cannot truly be a faithful Christian if you're not willing to wrestle with that. If that niggling suspicion has never entered into your mind, then really the faith isn't real at all. It's just blind stupidity. Let's be blunt, shall we? And yet faith calls us to enter into something, to really, truly wrestle with it, and to come out on the other side with a knowledge that even though it doesn't 100% make sense, in our heart of hearts, we know it to be true. And I know that this is something that we all wrestle with because I wrestle with it too. I see things every day and I think, how is this possible? How can this happen? How can a divine God that I believe in, that is so wonderful, so magnificent, so loving, watch this stuff occur? We wrestle with it, right? And I'm not here to answer that question for you. I'm not going to be able to prove God to you today. I wish I could. But I can't because there is no way of proving it. There is only the invitation to wrestle with your reality enough to really, truly, honestly wrestle with your reality enough to know that there's nothing else that could possibly be true, but that God is with you. And so I invite you today, in a time of quiet and space, a time of safety, to really, really wonder, to really, really consider your own life, to consider the world around you. Because we want God to be obvious. We want to be able to win in an argument with an atheist, don't we? I mean, God, they're irritating. Gosh, there is nothing worse than a 23-year-old boy who's just discovered atheism. And he's come to convince you. I'm like, dude, really? You think I haven't considered any of this before now? I just want to drink my scotch at this wedding reception. That's all I want to do. And here you've decided to convert me to atheism. Thank you. God, they're irritating, aren't they? Can we be real for a second? They are irritating. I've had a few run-ins, if you can't tell. Not converted yet, but they keep trying. And every year, we produce another batch of them. Thank you, Richard Dawkins. Probably a great scientist, terrible theologian. Anyhow, we have got to be willing to wrestle with this in our hearts. And when we do that, really, truly, openly, and honestly, when we look at our lives, when we look at the world around us, I really, truly believe that there is no way that we will not see and experience the divine. I invite you to consider your own life. Consider the darkest moments that you have been in. We've all had some pretty dark moments, haven't we? We have. Can you look back on them? Can you look back on them and the pain in that moment? Were you alone? Okay, she was. But the reality is, when we can really, truly look back on those moments, we realize that we never walked them alone. It doesn't mean that the pain wasn't real. It doesn't mean that the experience wasn't painful. But it means that we didn't do it alone, because we're all here today. And we're all able to go back and look at that. Think on the most amazing moments of your life. The most incredible, inspiring, awesome moments of your life. Were you alone? Can you, on this end of it, look back and remember what that was like? That incredible moment of awareness that this awesomeness, this isn't mine. What I'm doing isn't mine. The birth of my children, okay, at the moment it was pretty ugly. Let's be real. But when I look back at that, I realized I wasn't alone in that. That incredible moment of creation, that wasn't mine. I may have birthed it. It was the awesomeness that I got to experience, but it wasn't mine. These are the incredible moments I ask you to consider. I ask you to consider the world around you this week. Now, some of it is painful and messy and ugly. It is. But it isn't completely ours. It isn't. And there are parts of it that are incredible and wonderful and awesome, and those aren't ours either. But it's only when we are willing to take the time to really, truly reflect on them, that we will realize for ourselves that God is with us. It cannot be proven to us. It cannot be debated to be true. That's not an argument that can be won or lost. It is something simply that must be experienced. And so I invite you in the coming week to take the time to really, truly reflect, to really, truly consider the world around you, to really, really be in that moment, to see that God is with us.